Okay, so hopefully you gave this one a try. Okay, so a sine curve, no stretch, no vertical reflection is going to look like this, right? Always just like drawing in that shape. Okay, now my amplitude is 1, because that a value is 1. My period is still 2 pi, because we haven't shifted the period, or sorry, adjusted the period. My phase shift is 2 pi over 3, and if I think about what direction that is, that's actually going to be in the positive direction, right? To the right, 2 pi over 3. I do have a vertical shift up 2, which means that my midline is y equals 2. My domain continues to be negative infinity to infinity. And I need to figure out my range, so I'm just going to think about if my midline is at 2 and my amplitude is 1, so I go up 1 from 2, I get 3, and I go down 1 from 2, I get 1. So my range is going to go from 1 to 3. So when I draw in this y-axis, because we're shifting to the right, I definitely want to give myself all the space that I can to the right of the graph. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and just draw in the y-axis. So the y-axis, if I'm going to go from 1 to 3, 1, 2, 3. And while I'm at it, I'm going to draw in my midline at 2. Okay, so there's my midline. 1, 2, 3, there's my y-axis. I also need to label my x-axis. So if I phase shift to the right 2 pi over 3, here's 2 pi over 3, okay? And then my period is 2 pi, so 2 pi divided into 4 intervals, we know is pi over 2. So I'm going to take 2 pi over 3, and I'm going to start adding pi over 2 to get my new intervals. But I need these to be a common denominator. So instead of adding pi over 2, I'm going to have to adjust both of these, aren't I? So now pi over 2, if I multiply that by 3, is 3 pi over 6. And if I make 2 pi over 3 adjusted to have a common denominator to 4 pi over 6. Now I have common denominators. So now I get 7 pi over 6 as my next interval. Okay, I'm going to take 7 pi over 6, add my same 3 pi over 6 again, and get 10 pi over 6. Which that reduces, right? That reduces to 5 pi over 3. But when I go to keep adding, I may as well just keep the 10 pi over 6 so that it already has the common denominator. So 10 pi over 6 plus 3 pi over 6 is 13 pi over 6. And then 13 pi over 6 plus 3 pi over 6, 16 pi over 6, which does reduce to 8 pi over 3. I'm going to check, make sure I have the right number of intervals, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I do have the right intervals here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw in my shape. So my shape starts on the midline, and we've shifted that over, right? So it's not on the y-axis anymore. Starts at the midline, goes up to the 3, to the maximum, back to the midline, down to the minimum, back to the midline. Ooh, that was a really bad attempt to draw in the shape. I'm kind of struggling here. All right, this should come down a little more. There we go. All right,